The train howled across the wastelands like something half alive, half angry. Dust rose from the iron wheels, gold against the dying sun. When it screeched to a stop at Red Hollow Station, only one passenger stepped down. A young woman with a wedding dress folded in her satchel and rope scars on her wrists. Her name was Clara Wynne, though folks here didn't know it. To the men unloading crates, she was just another mail-order bride from back east, shipped like a promise, unwrapped like a bargain. But no one came to claim her. The telegram she carried said, "To Miss Clara Wynne, arrival confirmed. Await my man at Red Hollow. Jay Calder." She waited. An hour passed, then 2. Only the crows and the wind gave her company, both loud and unkind. When she asked the station keeper if anyone had been by that name, he spat his tobacco and said, "Calder's dead. Got shot over a fence line 6 days back. Guess you'll need a new groom, missy." The words hit harder than the desert sun. Not because she loved the man, she'd never met him, but because she'd sold her last dollar to get here. Her old life in Kansas was gone. The false charge of witchcraft, the mob with torches, the branding iron that touched her shoulder like hellfire. She tugged her shawl tighter. Beneath the fabric, the burned brand, a crooked W, still throbbed faintly, like it remembered. That's when a voice, rough as gravel and low as thunder, came from behind her. "You ain't from here," it said. She turned. A tall man leaned on the station fence, coat torn, jaw rough with days of beard, and eyes that carried too many graves. His left hand shook slightly when he reached for his hat. The right one held a bandaged rifle, the kind used more for ghosts than coyotes. "I'm not from anywhere anymore," she replied. The man nodded, slow. "Then you fit right in." He introduced himself as Elias Rourke, a rancher from a dying stretch of land north of the canyon. His voice didn't invite questions, but it didn't push her away either. He said he could use a cook. She said she could use a roof. Neither of them smiled. The deal was made in silence, under a sky the color of cooling iron. As they rode out of town, the wind lifted her shawl, and the old scar glinted against her skin. Elias saw it, but said nothing. He just slowed the horse a little, as if the night air might sting her shoulder less. Behind them, Red Hollow shrank to a dot of smoke. Ahead, the Badlands stretched endless and empty. 2 strangers riding into a land that had already judged them both. And from the rattling train behind, the conductor muttered, "That ain't the bride he ordered. But hell, maybe that's the one he needed." If you love quiet courage in the Wild West, subscribe for more tales. The wind changed when they reached his land. Not softer, just different. It carried the smell of smoke and sage, of something once alive that had been cut down too soon. Elias Rourke's ranch sat lonely against the high ridge, its fences half fallen, and its barns leaning like old men, too tired to stand straight. The cattle were gone, the well dry, and the fields gray with dust. The house itself looked ashamed to still be standing. Clara stepped down from the wagon and looked around. "This place," she said quietly, "looks like it's been waiting for an apology." Elias almost smiled, almost. "Then it's waiting, same as me." They said nothing more that night. He showed her the kitchen. 1 window, 1 cracked stove, 1 Bible missing its cover. She lit a lamp, saw the spider webs hanging like lace, and began to clean. He offered no help, just stood by the door, with that far-off look of a man who'd buried too many yesterdays. When darkness settled, the coyotes sang. She cooked beans in a dented pot, handed him a bowl, and took one herself. They ate without a word. But when she reached for her cup, her sleeve slipped, and the burn mark on her shoulder caught the light. Elias paused, his spoon stilled in midair. "That from a branding iron?" he asked softly. She froze. The air turned heavy. "Wasn't my choice," she whispered. "They said I cursed their crops. Said I brought sickness. All I did was tend a fever the preacher's wife had, and she died anyway." Her voice broke, then steadied. "I ran before they could finish their sermon." Elias looked at her for a long time. Not pitying, just seeing. "I've been branded, too," he said finally. He lifted his shirt just enough to show a long, pale scar on his ribs. "Confederate iron. Said I deserted. I called it waking up." The lamp flickered between them, two ghosts warming their hands on a single fire. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like old bones. That night, Clara lay on the floor by the stove while Elias took the chair by the window. Neither slept much. At dawn, she rose, wrapped her shawl, and walked to the well. The rope was frayed, the bucket split. Still, she pulled, slow, steady, patient, until the sound of water came from below. By evening, the house smelled of soap and bread. Elias stood by the doorway, watching her scrub the dirt from the walls. He didn't thank her, but something eased in his shoulders. Maybe because the silence no longer hurt. Later he brought out a box from the attic, a folded wedding veil, yellowed with dust. "My wife's," he said. "She died birthing a son, who didn't stay." Clara set down her cloth. "You can bury it, if it hurts to keep." He shook his head. "Not yet. Burying things don't make 'em lighter. Sometimes you gotta carry 'em till they turn into something else." She looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time since Kansas, she didn't feel afraid of a man's eyes. That night, when the fire cracked low, Elias spoke again. "You ain't got to stay here. Folks in town'll find work for a woman." "Who's quiet?" Clara's lips curved faintly. "I've been quiet my whole life, Mr. Rourke. I came west to see what happens when I stop." Outside, the moon hung low and red, like a wound trying to heal. And somewhere in the dark, the first coyote stopped singing. If her courage still burns brighter than shame, subscribe for more. It was late August when the trouble came. The sky had turned to brass, the earth to powder, and the only thing that grew was rumor. Red Hollow had a new sheriff, a slick man named Vance Crowder, all silver buttons and black intentions. He'd been a bounty gun during the war, the kind who shot for pay and prayed only when someone was watching. Folks said he was rebuilding order. What he was really doing was building fear. He rode out to Elias Rourke's ranch one afternoon with 2 deputies and a piece of paper. The paper said the land belonged to the bank. The look in his eyes said it belonged to him. Elias met them at the gate, calm as an old oak. "Got no quarrel with lawmen," he said, "but I paid this land twice over." Crowder smiled, a wolf's smile, all teeth and hunger. "Maybe so, but the bank don't honor ghosts, and your witness is 6 feet under." Then he noticed Clara, standing in the doorway with a broom in her hand and a straight spine. "Well now," he said, tipping his hat low. "Who's the lady? Mail order bride or something less official?" Elias's jaw tightened. "She's my wife." That was the first time he'd said it aloud. The deputies chuckled. Crowder's grin widened. "Funny thing, Rourke. Word in town says you took in a branded witch." The air went still. Even the wind paused to listen. Clara's fingers gripped the broom tighter. The mark on her shoulder prickled like it knew it was being called out. Elias stepped forward. "You say that again, Sheriff." Crowder swung down from his horse, boots heavy in the dust. "I said maybe she cursed this ranch same as she cursed the last one. Maybe that's why the crops don't grow." He moved closer, so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Maybe we ought to test her again. See if she burns cleaner this time." That's when Elias hit him. No warning, just a sound like thunder cracking through bone. The first deputy drew his gun, but Elias was faster. A single shot rang through the dry wind, sharp, echoing, final. The second deputy froze, hand halfway to his holster. Elias's rifle was already leveled. "Leave the paper," he said. They did, and Crowder, bleeding from his nose, spat into the dust and swore, "You'll hang for this, Rourke, and your witch'll hang twice." They rode off in a storm of dust and curses. Clara ran to him. His knuckles were bleeding, his face still carved with rage. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I ain't letting men talk that way about you." That night, the sound of hooves echoed from the valley. The law was coming back, and this time they'd bring a rope. Elias loaded his rifle. Clara packed bread, water, and one small Bible. They left under moonlight, through a canyon road that had forgotten what mercy looked like. By dawn, they found refuge at an old mission chapel, half burned, half blessed. Inside, the pews were gone, the altar broken, but a cross still hung crooked on the wall. Clara traced the cracked wood with her fingers. Maybe God still visits the places that nobody else does. Elias leaned against the doorframe, listening to the distant thud of riders. "They'll find us soon." She nodded. "Then we wait." When the posse finally came, the sun was a white fire. Bullets tore through the chapel walls like angry bees. Elias returned fire, slow and steady. Clara stayed low, whispering prayers she didn't remember learning. One bullet grazed Elias's arm. Another split the cross clean in two. Dust filled the air like smoke. And then, silence. Through the haze, Crowder's voice came again. "Come out, witch. Let's see if your man's blood can save you." But before Elias could move, Clara stood. She stepped into the doorway, hair loose, eyes steady. "No man's blood saves me," she said. "Only truth." She lifted the burnt sleeve from her shoulder and showed them the mark, not as shame, but as proof. "Y'all called me cursed, but I'm still here. That means your curses don't work." For a moment, no one moved. Then a small voice from the back of the posse, a child's voice, piped up, trembling. "Ma, she looks like us." It cracked the silence like a prayer in a graveyard. Crowder's face twisted. "Get back, boy!" But the child's words had done their damage. The crowd, once loud, now uneasy, began to shift, murmur, hesitate. Elias stepped beside her, rifle still warm. "You done here, Sheriff?" he said. Crowder looked around, saw no one following him, and spat into the dirt again. "This ain't over." Then he turned his horse and rode off, alone. The wind carried his dust away, and for the first time in months, Clara felt the air move easy again. If truth still stands when fear breaks, subscribe for more tales. They rode until the canyon light faded to dusk and the smell of sage filled the air again. Elias's arm bled through his sleeve, dark and quiet. Clara tore a strip from her skirt and tied it tight, the knot trembling only once. Neither spoke much. There wasn't anything words could fix. The old trail bent through the hills like a question no one wanted to answer. By nightfall, they reached a dry creek bed lined with dead cottonwoods. The stars hung low, fierce and watchful. Elias built a fire that didn't smoke. Clara warmed her hands, watching the shadows play across his face. He caught her looking. "You did something back there," he said. She blinked. "What do you mean?" "That crowd. I seen fear before, but you turned it. They looked at you like maybe they were the ones being judged." She shrugged. "Maybe they were." Silence again, the kind that holds two lives in it. After a while, Clara reached into her satchel. She pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth, the old brand iron. She'd carried it since Kansas, as if the proof of what they'd done to her kept her honest somehow. The metal still stank faintly of burnt flesh and hate. She set it in the fire. Elias frowned. "You sure?" She nodded. "I'm done carrying what ain't mine." The flames bit into the iron. It hissed and smoked, curling like something alive. The smell was foul, metallic, final. When it was red hot, she used a stick to lift it out, trembling but steady. "Give me your shovel," she said. He hesitated. "What for?" "I'm burying it." She walked a few yards from the fire, found a soft patch of earth by the dry creek, and dug. The night wind whipped her hair, scattering ash around her boots. She set the glowing iron into the hole, watched it fade to black, and covered it with dirt until the ground looked plain again, like no one had ever been burned for being different. When she came back, her face was streaked with sweat and moonlight. Elias handed her his canteen. "You did right," he said. She looked up at him, eyes fierce and wet. "Then why's my chest still heavy?" He thought for a long while. Then he said, "Because forgiveness don't come from burying. It comes from surviving it twice, once in the flesh and once in your memory." She stared into the fire, the words sinking in like rain into dust. After a while, she said softly, "You ever forgive yourself, Elias Rourke?" He stared into the flames too. "Working on it." Later that night, the coyotes howled again, but this time their cries sounded less like hunger and more like song. Clara lay under the open sky, and for the first time, sleep came without dreams. When dawn broke, she woke to find Elias sitting by the creek, the dirt from the burial still on his boots. He held a small piece of metal, the crooked W from the brand, pried loose before she buried the rest. It was bent, blackened, and small enough to fit in his palm. "What are you doing with that?" she asked. He turned it once in the light. "Thought maybe we shouldn't let 'em have the last word." He took out his knife, scraped the edges, and turned the W into something else, a shape like a bird mid-flight. Then he handed it to her. "Now it ain't a brand. It's a sign." She took it carefully. It was still warm. "Maybe I'll keep it," she whispered. "Not as what they did, but what I lived through." He nodded once. "That's what surviving means, miss." She smiled faintly. "It's Mrs. Now, remember?" Elias's mouth curved, slow and weary. "Yeah, guess it is." The fire died behind them. Ahead lay the road back toward Red Hollow, a road neither of them wanted, but both knew they had to take. The world wouldn't change just because one crowd had gone quiet. But sometimes quiet was the first sound of something new being born. If you still believe scars can turn into wings, subscribe for more tales. They returned to Red Hollow a week later, slow and unannounced. The town had gone quieter since the gunfire. Fear does that. It makes even the loudest men walk softer. Dust still ruled the streets, and the same iron church bell still hung, cracked, but something had shifted, faint and human. Clara wore her shawl low that morning, the old scar hidden beneath the edge. Elias rode beside her, arm bandaged, face unreadable. The townsfolk watched from behind windows, their silence heavy as judgment. They went first to the sheriff's office. Crowder wasn't there. His deputy, a boy hardly old enough to shave, met them at the door. "Crowder's gone," he said. "Left 2 nights back. Word is, he rode south. Didn't say why." Elias nodded once. "Then I reckon that's answer enough." They turned to leave, but the boy called after them. "Ma says you can use our well if yours runs dry." Clara stopped. A small kindness, clumsy but real. She met the boy's eyes and smiled. "Tell your ma I'll bring her bread next time." Outside, the noon light hit hard. Yet it didn't feel cruel anymore. Just honest. They spent the next months rebuilding what had been burned. The ranch slowly began to live again, not in the way it used to, but in the way wounded things do. The well filled with spring water. A single calf was born in October. And beneath the cottonwoods by the dry creek, Clara planted a small patch of wildflowers. She worked the dirt with her bare hands, nails black with earth. Every handful she turned over felt like another breath she'd been holding since Kansas. Elias watched from the porch, his shoulders still stiff, his heart quieter than it had been in years. "You plantin' for a show or for ghosts?" he asked one evening. She looked up, wiping her brow. "For both, maybe. Ghosts like color, too." He grinned, a small, tired, true grin. "Then make sure you give 'em plenty." That night, he helped her set a stone at the edge of the garden, a flat, river-worn thing they found by the creek. Clara etched one word into it with his knife. "Still." When she was done, she set the small bird-shaped piece of iron on top, the one he had carved from the brand. The wind came gentle, almost kind, brushing her hair across her face. "Still alive," she whispered. "Still here." Elias nodded. "And that's the best kind of revenge." Winter came and passed. Spring rose from the red soil like a promise. The garden spread wider. Each week, the flowers bending toward the sun, as if trying to remember how to trust it. People from town began to visit now and then. Some brought seed. Some just stood there, hat in hand, quiet. A few even knelt, touching the petals with the same care they once reserved for prayer. They never spoke of witchcraft again. One morning, a small girl came up the road, her mother trailing behind. She stopped at the garden and stared at Clara. "My pa says you used to be bad," she said shyly, "but I think you just got burned wrong." Clara knelt, smiling through the ache in her chest. "Maybe that's what happens to all of us, sweetheart. Some of us just take longer to grow back." The girl nodded solemnly and laid a single white daisy on the stone marked "Still." Elias watched from the fence line, hat over his heart. He didn't say a word, but when she looked up at him, his eyes said everything. The brand was gone. The fear was smaller, and in its place, just a garden, a scar, and a quiet kind of freedom. As the sun set behind the canyon, the sky turned copper and rose. Clara and Elias sat side by side, boots in the dust, silence between them no longer heavy. The air smelled of earth and forgiveness. She reached out and took his hand. He didn't pull away. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" she asked. Elias shook his head, slow. I think about what still is. That's enough for me. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the light fading to gold. And in that quiet, between the dying sun and the growing dark, the old West held its breath. A woman branded, a man broken, both still standing. Not saints, not heroes, just survivors. If you still believe mercy grows where fire once burned, subscribe for more Wild West tales.